For example, if I was an Athenian having a quarrel with another Athenian over property, I could go to the Athenian tribunal. But if it was a Roman involved, then it was the Roman law. The Roman law is always above everything else. Now, the Roman law specifically dealt with some cases that had to do, for example, with murder, riots, revolution, sedition, things like that. That's why, in the end, when all these things happened, the Roman authorities would come into play. Now, in the Book of Acts, we read that time and again, when whether the Jews or other people in the cities that Paul was visiting and evangelizing wanted to bring the Roman authorities into play, they never said things like, he's attacking religion, he's being blasphemous, he's saying things that are against our beliefs. No, they always try to persuade the Roman authorities, saying that this person is either breaking the Roman law or he's attacking our own traditions, our own Roman traditions. So it is the same accusation here. He's persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Law is a key word here. Another thing that's interesting is this reference to Gallio being the proconsul of Achaia. Because again, that was one of those verses heavily attacked in the past, saying it was used as a proof that the Book of Acts is not a historically accurate book. They said, who's this Gallio? First of all, why proconsul of Achaia? Well, the Roman Empire was divided into provinces. Provinces at the borders, or that they were unruly and needed a strong military presence, would have a consul appointed directly by the emperor. Or if you like, the province was run by the emperor. Provinces that were pacified, or if you like, easier to run, they were run by the Senate, who would appoint a proconsul. And we know that Claudius had recently given Achaia back to the Senate. So the title of proconsul, being the ruler here, is absolutely correct. So then we have the remaining question, what about Gallio? For decades, people said, that's an invention. It never happened. Who's this Gallio? We don't have any reference about him. Well, the answer came not from Corinth, but from Delphi. Delphi is the most important oracle of the ancient world, and happens to be on the opposite shore. It's not far away from here. It's the main sanctuary dedicated to Apollo. In excavations there, a few decades ago, an inscription came up and popped out in pieces. They put it back together, and when they read it, they found that it was a letter of Emperor Claudius addressed to the proconsul of Achaia named Gallio. It's another famous example of the stone speaking. Sometimes you find the stone speakings in places that are completely unrelated with biblical archaeology. And what is interesting is that thanks to that inscription, we know that Gallio was proconsul here in the year 52 AD, and that's a safe date. Later on, discovered in other sources, we found out more about Gallio. But thanks to that stone, we know that Gallio was here in the year 52 AD. We know that he had some health problems. He remained here only for a year. Now, the other thing that we know from the Book of Acts was that Paul remained here 18 months. And during his stay, he met Gallio. So Paul stayed here either 51 to 52 or 52 to 53 AD. No matter which is correct, thanks to that safe date, we can actually trace and date all the trips of Paul before and after his stay in Corinth. Here on the left, you already see the Acropolis of Corinth. For the most part, what we see today is medieval. The ancient parts are further in. And at the very top of that rock, I have to imagine that in the time of Paul, there would have been this famous temple of Aphrodite. Basically, the temple was not that famous, it was the cult that was famous. The temple was nothing like the Parthenon, it was something much humbler, smaller. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you, but since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourselves, you'll not be a judge of such things. So he had them ejected from the court. Then they all turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue ruler, and beat him in front of the court, but Gallio showed no concern whatever. Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time, then he left the brothers and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off in Cenchrea because of a vow he had taken. Gallio is probably the best Roman governor that Paul ever met, for the simple reason that he applied the Roman law. He went directly to the point. This is about your own stuff, it's not about the Roman law. So there is no case, and he had an ejected. Just remember how many times Paul was accused in front of the Roman authorities, and the Roman authorities took severe measures against him. In some cases, simply arresting him and kind of letting everything for a later trial. In some cases, severely mistreating him. The case at Philippi, he was beaten, he was flogged, he was put into prison, only to find out later on that it was a big mistake. And then they tried to sneak him out of prison without anybody else hearing about that. In this case, we have the one Roman governor that goes directly to the point. It's like the one case in which Paul did not even need to state who he was. I'm Paul, I'm a Roman citizen. No, we read nothing of this here. Gallio did not care at all. It's not about the Roman law, it's not my business. Obviously there is no case, so out of here. But Gallio was known by other Roman sources as Dulcis Gallio, sweet Gallio. He was a brother of Seneca. Seneca had been the stepbrother, actually, was a philosopher that had been the teacher of Nero for many years. And as long as Seneca lived, Nero was kind of, if I can use the term milder, or more confined in his haziness. The truth is that Nero murdered Seneca, and after that everything started going sour. We have entered the grounds of ancient Corinth. You have to imagine that when Paul was here, the city walls run from the rock on the left to the sea to the right. And not all this area was inhabited though, but it was very common in ancient times to connect with walls. The stronghold with the city and the city with the port, because that will also give you an extra space, except for the easy access to those important spots. It will also give you an extra space for the people in the countryside to find shelter in times of crisis. What happened with Corinth is that as the years passed in the Middle Ages and all these big cities of antiquity started losing their population because of plague, raids, famines, etc., Corinth still retained its prominent position as a province capital, but the time came that Corinth, in the 19th century, just imagine, Athens 6,000 people, Corinth even less. It was a small insignificant village. In the mid-19th century, an earthquake struck the area. It was devastated. Where the houses fell, the archaeologists did not allow the people to rebuild. They simply moved them to another area and they started digging. So today we have an important excavation here. For the most part it's completed. What we're going to see is completed. It was completed years ago. An excavation that does not cover, some say 2, some say 5% of the whole city, but it happens to be the most important spot, the very center. What the Greeks would call agora, what the Romans would call the forum. So what we're going to see for the most part is what survives from Roman times, because remember, the city was razed to the ground completely. There's one thing that survives from the older city, and that's the Temple of Apollo. We already see the columns to our right, 6th century before Christ. Corinth was and still is one of the most important centers of agriculture in Greece. I have to say that one of the most famous exports of Greece around the world is Corinthian raisins. And as a matter of fact, the word currant comes from the word Corinth. The site is divided into parts. There is the upper part, which you're going to visit first, which we need a ticket that we're going to take right now. That has basically the forum and the museum. There's also a lower part that is not in such a good shape, but there's one thing there that's a cornerstone of biblical archaeology here in Corinth. It's the Erastus inscription. We're also going to visit the museum that has things. It's a small one, kind of narrow, so it